we go. All right, we're going live in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to have you guys here. I'm elated to be doing this on a Saturday. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. And you guys are amazing. And I really want to say thank you for continuing to support local businesses and for continuing to be just amazing people showing up virtually. Our community may not be able to be together physically, but we're able to be together in this way. So thank you guys for showing up today. My name is McKaylee. I'm with Tattered Cover Bookstore. And for those of you who may be joining us for the first time, Tattered Cover is a local independent bookstore in Denver, Colorado. I've been seeing in the chat, we've got people from Ohio and Colorado, North Carolina, South Carolina, Canada, England, California, and so I just want to make sure you guys know what Tattered Cover is. We have 4 locations in the Denver metro area, so if you're in that area, you can come into the store from 10 to 6, 7 days a week. As long as you're wearing your mask over your mouth and your nose, you can come in and spend about 90 minutes with us browsing in the store. However, if you're not nearby and I understand not feeling like traveling right now, our website is still open 24/7. And that goes for you Coloradans who may not want to get out of your house or, change out of pajamas. But like I said, we're open 24/7 at tatteredcover.com, which is where you can get copies of, say Pianos and Flowers, the book we're talking about today. I want to also let you know that closed captioning is enabled for those who might need it on this event. As long as you just hover your mouse over the video screen you're watching me on, there's a black bar at the bottom and there's a button that says CC on it, and that'll enable closed captioning. We have several upcoming events virtually here all next week. I've got events from Tuesday till Saturday, including Joseph Schneider, who writes mystery novels, on the 29th, and Sadiqa Johnson, who's one of my favorite historical fiction authors, on Saturday at 5 p.m. Mountain Time. So check our website for all of those virtual events. Now the event that we're talking about today, I'm personally very excited for this one. Alexander McCall Smith is who we are welcoming today. Alexander is often referred to as Sandy, is one of the world's most prolific and best-loved authors. For many years, he was a professor of medical law and worked in universities in the UK and abroad before turning his hand to writing fiction. He has written and contributed to more than 100 books, including specialist academic titles, short story collections, and a number of immensely popular children's books. His first book, The White Hippo, a children's book, was published by Hamish Hamilton in 1980, but it wasn't until the publication of the highly successful #1 Ladies Detective Agency series that Alexander became a household name. The series has now sold over 20 million copies in the English language alone, and since the books took off, he has devoted his time to writing. Alexander has received numerous awards for his writing and holds 12 honorary doctorates from universities in Europe and North America. In 2007, he received a CBE for services to literature, and in 2011 was honored by the President of Botswana for services through literature to the country. In 2015, he received the Bollinger Everyman Wodehouse Prize for Comic Fiction, and in 2017, the National Arts Club of America Medal of Honor in Achievement in Literature. And we are here talking about his latest book, Pianos and Flowers. It is my honor to welcome Alexander Sandy McCall Smith. We're going to have him turn on his video here. And there he is.
Hello, McKaylee. Hello.
Welcome. We're so excited to have you. Thank you so much for joining us, Sandy, if I may.
Yes, of course. Well, it's a very great pleasure to be with you through this wonderful technology. I have, in fact, been in your bookstore on more than one occasion when I've been on tour and have called in on Denver. And I'm sorry I can't be there with you in person today, but this, as we were saying earlier on, this enables us to speak to rather more people, which is very nice.
Exactly. And that's something that I'm just been really grateful for in this pandemic, and that a way that we can still have these community connections through literature and stories. And while it may be virtual, which is what us book people might not be used to, I think we're all adapting really well to this environment. But I want to start off by talking about Pianos and Flowers. It is such a unique collection of short stories. If you could just tell us a little bit about it. I know that there's kind of a common theme, but they're all very unique stories. if you could give us a brief summary just to start us off here.
Yes, it's there's an interesting background to this particular book, Pianos and Flowers. It actually goes back. If I were to tell the full story, I won't at great length, but just briefly.
That's okay.
Tell the full story about it. It starts with another book altogether, which was a book written by Robert Flynn Johnson, who's a photographic historian in San Francisco, and he did a wonderful book called Being Human. You see that rather nice picture of the young women there jumping across the page. And what this book is a collection of orphan photographs. This Being Human book. He found this very, very large collection, or formed this very large collection of photographs that people kept in old tins and in the loft, that sort of thing. A lot of families have got these black and white photographs from heaven knows when, and they don't know who's in them. And sometimes the photographs are really very peculiar. People doing all sorts of odd things, dressing up and doing all sorts of strange things. And he approached me, Mr. Johnson approached me and said, would I write an introduction to this book? And of course, the introduction could have talked about the importance of old photographs and what they taught us about the world, but I decided not to do that. And so in my introduction, what I did was I took a selection of these photographs and created a story around the photograph, an imaginary story of what I thought might be happening. So there, for example, is a picture of a young woman with a skeleton.
Wow!
We can see she's looking at the skeleton, standing next to the skeleton.
Quite longingly, too.
You know, what's going on in that photograph? And so I created a story about this medical student. She's a medical student back in the 1930s, but she always was attracted to very thin men. And so she goes to the medical students' dance with a skeleton, and so on. And some of these photographs are very, very strange. People are doing very odd things in them. Here's one in which somebody is balancing, if I've got it.
Yeah, a chair on their chin.
Yes, he's balancing a chair on his chin. Very, very strange photograph. Now, what is happening there? Well, you know, what can one say? And so I created a story about Uncle Norman, who had various party tricks, one of which was, and what I found with that book was the attraction of getting an old photograph and then just allowing one's imagination to work on it and trying to create a backstory for the people we see in the photograph and just imagining what is happening. And that led to my first book of this sort, which was a book called Chance Developments.
Yes.
And that's been published in the States and Canada as well. And on the cover there, we see this man sitting on the lap of this lady. There's a man with a rather nice white hat sitting on the lady's lap. And that was just one of these photographs that I was given by a body in Scotland, which actually has a very good collection of old photographs. They gave me a number of their photographs and said, well, what do you make of these? That photograph, I looked at it and I thought, what's happening there? And I decided that she was a member of a Canadian circus, and she was a ventriloquist, and she had this ventriloquist's doll. And they're based in Vancouver, but they toured around and they went over the border into the United States, Washington State, Oregon, places like that, not too far from BC and Vancouver. And unfortunately, there's a fire in her caravan, and the ventriloquist's doll is burnt to a cinder. And this man here is was the lion tamer in the circus, and he says, well, I could stand in for your ventriloquist doll. Now, he's always rather liked her, he's rather admired her. So he goes and he sits on her lap, and he pretends to be the ventriloquist doll, and this goes down very, very well with the audience in the circus. And of course, eventually they get married. So it's a happy ending to the story.
Right.
So I so enjoyed that. that then I decided that I'd like to write another book along those lines. And that's when this book, Pianos and Flowers, came to mind. Now, Pianos and Flowers, there we've got a rather nice picture on the cover there of this woman riding on the crossbar of a bicycle, ridden by that man. The bicycle's being steered by the man in the cap. And there I was asked by a newspaper, large newspaper in the UK called the Sunday Times, whether I would write a series of stories for them. And I said, okay, I'll do that. But you look in your photographic archive, in the newspaper's photographic archive, find pictures, odd pictures, which you don't know what they're about. Send them to me and I'll write stories about them. And so they had a look in their archive, and of course they had wonderful collections of photographs, and they sent me these photographs, and I sat down and stories just came to mind. I looked at the photographs and immediately ideas came to me. So, for example, there's one here. I'll show you the sort of thing that we did. This is the Pianos and Flowers book. There, that photograph there, which may not be shown terribly well, but you see there's a big building which is collapsing. That big building in the background is collapsing. And in the foreground there, you will see a man in a suit walking away, right? So he's walking away from this collapsing building.
That sounds suspicious to me.
It sounds very suspicious. What's going on? And what I decided was that the man walking away from this collapsing building is an architect. And he's going home to have words with his mother. And this is what happened. He goes home, speaks to his mother. He confronted her when he returned from the site. "Ma," he said, his voice rising in anger, "I am really, really cross. Did you fiddle about with those plans I left in my study? Did you touch them?" She affected a look of innocence. "Me? Your study?" "Yes," he said, fixing her with an unrelenting stare. She turned away. "Maybe a little," she muttered. "The offices at the front were too small. I rubbed out a wall, just a small one though. It gave them much more room." And that actually, there's a story behind that story, so to speak. Some years back, my wife and I were in the north of Scotland, and we went to a dinner party where I found myself sitting next to a very distinguished civil engineer who had spent a lot of time in the Far East, building very big projects, civil engineering projects. And he, in the course of the conversation, he said to me that sometimes his wife interfered with his drawings, with the plans.
No,
yeah, and I thought this is a lovely idea. And of course, he built bridges, so you can imagine that was. So I thought, wouldn't it be fun if we had a story about somebody who shouldn't be practicing architecture, just makes a few changes.
I love that. And to me, it feels like that a lot of these stories were kind of started from that phrase of, wouldn't it be fun? You know what I mean? There's a jovial nature to some of these. Some of them, have their own twists and turns and a heartache and some sadness, but in the end, these really are very entertaining and meant to entertain. And I'm curious about that playfulness in your writing. That it appears in numerous ones of your books, but where does that come from, and why do you feel this need to put that in your stories?
Well, I think that I must say that part of the business of being an author is that when you when you look out at the world, you ask these what-if questions. It's something which is very basic to us. This is what we like to do as human beings, really. We like to imagine what would be the case if. And of course, there's a little offshoot of that. There's a series of, as you know, of historical books where they ask this what-if question. What if the wind had been in a different direction at a famous 16th century battle or something of that sort? And of course, you come up sometimes with extraordinary possibilities that history could have been totally different if there just hadn't been some sort of, if there'd been a slightly different set of events taking place. So I think that being an author, you look at the world and you say you have to be curious about what you see, and then you have to speculate, and you have to let your imagination work. And I find that's just natural to me. If I'm in a restaurant, I spend more time looking at the surrounding tables and the people who are in the restaurant, wondering who these people are. It's and of course, if you can hear people's conversation, even better. It's rather it's rather nice. I love hearing snippets of conversation, because again, that could be the beginning of a story. My wife and I were on a bicycle ride the other day at the weekend, and we were riding along a bicycle path in Edinburgh, and there were some people going for a walk. We passed them, and as I went past, this woman said to her friend, "Well, the thing about Pete is he is always, absolutely always, really cheerful." and then of course I'd passed, and so who's Pete? What's the story there? It's just really, and of course it's very frustrating when you hear just one side of a conversation. If people are talking on their cell phones, you hear them say something, and you don't hear what's being said at the other side. That's extremely frustrating. I think that if people use their cell phones on trains, they should be obliged to plug them into the public address system so that everybody in the carriage can hear both sides of the conversation. I've made that suggestion to the railway authorities, but they never act on these good ideas. It's a great pity. So I think it's a question of the what if, which is involved in fiction. And in my particular case, I like to imagine unexpected, sometimes slightly absurd things, but generally upbeat and generally amusing, because I think that the world can be a vale of tears, particularly at the moment. People have had to put up with so much in various ways. In so many different countries, people have really been, I suppose, living a rather bleak period. And I think it's important that we should remind ourselves that that there are still very positive things about being human, and that it's still possible to look at the world and say, well, aren't these wonderful things happening?
And I think that's very true and very valid, and I think it's something that we need, especially right now in this time, and it's so refreshing to have these types of books and these types of stories that you've gifted us with. And I'm curious what your process is when you're people watching or when you're listening to the conversations. Like, do you have a notebook with you that you jot them down, or is your memory over these years just so incredible? What does that process look like?
Well, I do carry a notebook. I think that's most authors, I think, have a piece of paper or notebook. I mean, I've got many notebooks. I've probably got sort of 50 or 60 notebooks, which I still use, these little notebooks. And indeed, I mean, there's one on the table right there. You see, this has got has it got anything in it? I think I have written. Yes, I've written a few notes in that. And so you have your notebook with you, and you'll just jot down something that you may see, or something that somebody may say, because people are always saying very strange things, and you write that down. Or you may see something which may just move you. And it may happen at a very odd moment. I was a couple of years ago in Sri Lanka, coming down. We were being driven down a road, a very steep road down a hillside, and when we got down to the bottom of the hillside, there was a man, a truck driver, who pulled his truck into the side, and there was a little shrine nearby. And he was conducting a blessing for his truck, which I thought was just very, very moving, seeing that. It's so you will see things that that move you, and they will appear subsequently in books. I find that I collect incidents which may be used at some stage in a book. A lot of what is in my books is based on my experience of the world. So, for example, in my number one ladies detective agency series, my Botswana books, when I go to Botswana, I'm always very interested to talk to people and to hear about their experiences. My latest number one ladies detective agency book, which is called How to Raise an Elephant, came from a casual meeting that I had. I was in Botswana in Maung, up in the north in the Okavango Delta, waiting to get on a little plane to take us out of this very remote part of Botswana. And there was a lady who was waiting to get on the same plane, and I sort of saw her in the line for security, and I wondered, what is her story? Where's she from, and what's she doing in this very remote place? I ended up sitting next to her on the plane, as it happened, and I discovered that she was from Dallas, which is a city in which I have worked as a visiting professor in the past, and so we got chatting, and she read my books, and I found out about her, and I discovered that she had set up an elephant sanctuary in Dallas for orphan elephants, and so we talked about this, and I said, well, this is a wonderful story. She's called Deborah Stevens, and she set up this charity based in Dallas to look after these elephants whose mothers had been shot by poachers. And I was so impressed with this story that I decided to put that into the next Maura Motswe book. And of course, the title reflects that. So chance meetings may lead to a book, may lead to heaven knows what.
Well, and I'm curious about that. You say you're an incident collector, but like how do you decide what incidents? Luckily, you have such a breadth of work that you've blessed us with, but what compels you, like, oh, this is the idea I'm going to run with this time. This is the incident I'm going to follow.
Well, I think you just tend to know it. You recognize that it's something important, that it says something about the world, or about who we are, how people cope with life. It says something about human nature. It may say something about human aspirations. It may say something about human kindness. That meeting over the elephant orphanage said a lot about human involvement in the natural world and about the plight of elephants. So it says a lot about big things. Just a simple story makes a point about big things. And I think that once you start talking to people, everybody has got an interesting story in their life. Everybody's experience of the world is significant and may actually be very, very surprising and moving. And so I think it's just a question of tuning your radar so that you get these things, and encouraging conversations with people. It depends. I mean, I think that there are some places where people don't want to talk about themselves, don't want to get, and as an author, it may be a bit of an uphill battle to get much out of them. But then there are other places where people really love talking and love to tell you their story. I spend quite a bit of time in India, and they love a good conversation in India. It's absolute, you don't really have to work very hard at getting a conversation in India, because people will be only too pleased to tell you about their life. My wife and I were staying in a hotel in Rajasthan a couple of years ago, and it was a very comfortable hotel with very nice grounds around it. And there were lots of monkeys in the trees in the bush roundabout, and these monkeys would come in, and they'd jump into the hotel and they come, and if they could possibly steal something, they'd steal it. They were looking for food. But I discovered that the hotel employed 2 men as monkey scarers. That was their job in life. They were there to go and scare these monkeys. And I thought this must be the most unusual job, in one of the most unusual jobs in the world. So I said to the hotel people, can I interview them? Can we talk? And they said yes. So we came along. So I had this half-hour conversation with the monkey scarers about being a monkey scarer. Which was, and they knew all these monkeys. They said, oh, that monkey over there, oh, he's a nasty monkey, that one. And of course, they nonetheless were respectful of monkeys, because monkeys in Hinduism have a particular status. And nearby was a wonderful monkey temple, which we visited. And of course, as we visited the temple, a little bit of a crowd developed around us, because we were clearly foreigners coming to this place. And then somebody came forward and began to tell me his story and so that's what happens in life. I think it's a great pity that in aeroplanes, I mean, most of us can't remember what it's like to travel in an airplane. I mean, where are these things? I believe they used to exist. But in airplanes, people used to talk to one another in what we fondly called the old days. Then they stopped. And a lot of people now won't talk in airplanes, which is a great pity, because you may be spending hours in the company of another person, and you sit there as if that person isn't there and you don't. So we're missing a great deal.
I love that. I think about times when I've talked to people on airplanes. I met somebody who had the Guinness World Record for the largest panda collection, because when I was a kid, I had a stuffed animal panda, and like, you never know, right? You never know who you're gonna meet, and I love that. I want to take the time to ask some of the viewers here some of the questions they have. So this will be my last question, but I would love to know what this book has taught you, either as a writer, about yourself, or about the world, or anything that you want to share with us, because you've written so many books and shared so many glorious stories with us. But I have this inkling that each one is still special in its own way and brings up these memories for you. So what did Pianos and Flowers teach you?
Well, I suppose that, as you say, the stories are quite different, because the photographs are rather different. But as I began to write the stories about each of these photographs, I suppose it made me reflect on something. Most of the stories have a particular element of reflection in them. They have a point, in a way, and it may be a reflection on loneliness. It may be a reflection on human ambition. It may be a reflection on kindness, or whatever. So one of the stories, for example, it's a story there. The photograph's rather difficult to make out in. It's I think we should imagine on the screen, so I won't bother with that. But it's 2 young men on a Scottish hillside with a horse.
I love this one. This one was my favorite. Sorry, keep going.
I like that story. I don't know. We'll see whether the photograph comes out. It doesn't really. It's too detailed. But you see that there's a horse there, and the two boys there with the horse, and it just tells their story. And they end up. They were friends as boys, and they end up in the Second World War, working in Greece, being taken into Greece, where they're liaising with the Greek resistance fighters in the mountains. Because I, in fact, knew somebody who did just that. He fought with the Greek patriots during the Second World War, up in the mountains, blowing up bridges and things like that. And I traced their story, and then at the end, they see one another years later, after the war. They've gone off and they've got married, and they meet one another at a school reunion. And I wanted to write something about the importance of saying things to people when the time is right to say things to people, saying things to your friends that you may feel inhibited about saying, or you may you may just not get round to saying how important it is to speak in that way. So may I just quickly read that little excerpt there? Okay.
Please do. Please go.
Their school organized a reunion at which both Bruce and David were present. The school pipe band played in the quad. Although it had started to rain, the soft, intermittent rain of the Scottish Highlands. As he watched the boys marching past in their kilts, the Highland pipes vocal in their lament, David thought, nobody is going to ask these boys to go to Greece. Nobody is going to expect of them what was expected of us. And what was that? To do what was needed to be done because a monstrous evil had shown its face, or because humanity had simply behaved in the way in which it had behaved throughout history and had squabbled and fought over grubby issues of territory. No, he thought, that's too cynical. It was not like that. It had been far simpler. It had been about bullying and cruelty and the strutting of dark gods. Bruce stood beside him. David said, do you remember something? Bruce waited. You said in Greece one day that you'd cry buckets at my funeral. Do you remember? Bruce smiled. Did I say that? Yes, you did. Well, I suppose I would. David felt the rain upon his face. I meant to say the same thing, he said. He paused. In the lives of most of us, the list of unsaid things was, he thought, a long one.
What a lovely note to move on to our Q&A. Like I said, that one's my favorite story in the bunch. They're all excellent, and I love the tie-in with the photographs. But that one, when you said it, I was like, that one hit me very strongly. And I'm sure that our viewers will feel the same way about that story and others that touch them when they read the book, if they haven't already. So I want to turn over to questions to you viewers there. A lot of you have already been active in the chat. Thank you so much for that. So you can type in your questions there. The first one I actually think is an interesting one of, have you missed talking to people and gathering ideas for your books during lockdown? And how have you been gathering ideas without that resource?
Well, that is indeed a very interesting question. That's something which I have missed, and I've missed that very much. It's been very nice being able to do these virtual events, but it's not quite the same as actually being there and meeting the readers and meeting people. It's the next best thing, and of course it's. I have missed just the ordinary contact of life. We're living in very restricted circumstances at the moment. I live in Scotland. We can't move outside the city here. I live in Edinburgh, capital of Scotland, and we're restricted to the city, which is a very nice city to be restricted to. But we can't really go anywhere, and we can't have people in the house. That's another thing which we can't do. So we're forgetting about that sort of casual contact with friends that was so important. So yes, I'm missing that. At the same time, I think I have time to reflect, as we all do. I think that we're realizing the value of quiet. We're reading a bit more, I think, and I think that we're probably having more time for introspection, which is not a bad thing to have a bit of quiet in our life. Maybe in our previous lives, before all this happened, we were rushing around a bit too much. I think a lot of people rather feel that. So that's the silver lining to that cloud.
Yeah, and you and I were talking about that a little bit before we went live, and I think it's so true to think about the idea that this time has afforded us the blessing and the privilege to slow down a little bit. But one of the things you mentioned that you're doing more often in your slow down time is reading. And so one of the questions I think this feeds in nicely to it is, what books do you enjoy reading? And I'd like to tack on, what books have gotten you through quarantine and gotten you through the pandemic so far?
Well, quite a few. I think rather too many to mention. I probably read a bit more non-fiction than fiction. I obviously enjoy fiction. I read quite a lot of poetry. I read poetry, and indeed these days I have a poetry discussion with 6 friends every Tuesday on Zoom, which is great. And we're looking at all sorts of, we're doing quite a bit of 19th century poetry at the moment, but we're dealing with modern poetry as contemporary poetry as well. So that's been, I'm reading a bit of biography, all sorts of things. So, and sometimes rather weird and wonderful things. I was reading about the philosophy of cats the other day, a book that I'd bought, which was What Cats Can Teach Us About about life. Yeah, I didn't quite agree with many of the propositions, in that cats, cats, I like cats. I'm very pro cat, but they're little sociopaths. I mean, I wouldn't really take many moral lessons from a cat.
I would not either. That's if you're gonna read it during at any time in your life, during quarantine seems to be the way to go for that particular book. So one viewer wants to know about potential movies for your books, which I'm sure that right now things are put on pause because of quarantine, but their specific question was, I loved the movies about the #1 ladies detective agency and was disappointed when they stopped. Will there be any movies about any of your other books?
Well, we're always dealing with movie people, and they're always acquiring options to make movies of the book. So at the moment we have discussions with, I think, 3 different sets of producers. Now, of course, the movie industry is a very peculiar industry. I mean, every so often they make a movie, but I think most of them spend their time talking about making movies. So that is continuing. But I think I've got reasonable expectation that we might be seeing some progress in that department. I'm not really at liberty to talk about it because these people like to keep everything under wraps. But I do think that there's a chance that we'll see more. I did very much enjoy the movies that they did make. The first Maramotsui one, the first #1 ladies detective agency film, was made by Anthony Minghella, who was a wonderful director. He did The English Patient and The Talented Mr. Ripley, which was a wonderful movie. And then he did the #1 ladies detective agency. And we had beautiful acting in that from Jill Scott, who's a very famous jazz singer. She played Mara Matsui, and Annika Noni Rose played Ma Makutsi, and they did it really, really well, really beautifully. So there we are. So let's hope it's, because it's nice when you see a book that you've well, if you've enjoyed writing it or reading it, seeing it translated well onto the screen. Sometimes it's disappointing. I mean, sometimes the movie gets it all wrong, and you think that's a missed opportunity, but often it enhances the book.
I completely agree, and I'm pleased to hear that you were pleased with the movie, because sometimes, like you said, authors are not as lucky. So Dorothy would like to know, where did you get the idea for the story of the Italian bulldozer?
Yes, the Italian bulldozer is a very peculiar novel of mine, and I think that came to me when I'm very keen on Italy, and we spend quite a bit of time in Italy, and I think the first idea of that came when we were having difficulty with our rental car at an airport in Rome. And it was a very complicated business. We'd reserved the car, but we kept being sent to a different office, and the usual sort of stuff. And I thought, this is a bit ridiculous. And suddenly I thought, well, what if we got something quite different from what we'd booked? we'd reserved such and such a car, and we got some. And I thought, well, we could get a bulldozer, and so I wrote that, and I sort of made up the story about arriving at Pisa airport and not getting the car that was reserved and getting a bulldozer and driving through the Italian countryside. And of course, I pointed out that actually it's rather nice driving a bulldozer through the Italian countryside because you're quite high up. You get a very good view of all the surrounding landscape. And if there are any bits of the landscape that you don't like, well, you're on a bulldozer, you can you can deal with that. And then, of course, the action moves to a place called Montalcino, which is a place I'm very fond of, which is one of these wonderful Tuscan hill towns where they produce a very good wine. And so the story just got going from there.
I'm in love with that. I think that's fantastic. And again, it's another one of those, wouldn't it be fun if,
Yes.
wouldn't it be fun if we got the Italian bulldozer? You've talked so much about all the wonderful places you've been, and Alicia wants to know, where would you still like to travel that you haven't been before?
Well, I'm not sure about that. There are various places in the world that I very much enjoy being in. I'm very fond, for example, of Australia, and I often set short stories in Australia. I find the Australian landscape very beguiling. It's a great. I'm missing not being able to visit there at the moment. I'm very fond of India. I like the Far East. The places that I've not been to. There are some countries that I haven't been to that I would like to see. Cambodia, for example, I haven't been in. There are big chunks of the world that I don't really know. So I've never been anywhere around about the Black Sea. I would like to, I would like to visit some of those. I'd like to see Armenia, and there's lots of places round about there that I wouldn't mind going to. I've been to, I suppose I've been traveled fairly extensively in South America, certainly. And United States, I enjoy being in the United States. United States, I've been, I think, in every state except the Dakotas. I must go there. I would like to.
That's a record. That's amazing. What a great.
Yeah, I've been in Alaska and Hawaii and places like that, but I haven't collected. I've collected just about all the other states. I quite like the South, actually. I was sent on tour to Mobile, Alabama, years ago, and I'd heard about Mobile, Alabama, but I didn't know about. But I really found that very, very interesting. I had a very interesting experience there. I was staying in a hotel in downtown Mobile, Alabama, and went out onto the sidewalk to just go for a walk around the block. And the first person who came along said, "Good morning." And I thought, this is rather nice. And then I went a bit further along the sidewalk and I got another good morning. And I decided this is a good place. Because that's something that I suppose in many places we don't greet one another. But I think that the pace of life seemed to be rather nice there. And I like being in the Midwest, in the United States, because I find Midwest people are very courteous. I think probably Americans themselves may not notice it very much. They just get used to you get used to your own country. But it's very striking. I think there's very nice manners in the American Midwest.
My boyfriend would be very excited to hear you say that. He is a born and bred Wisconsinite. So yes. Those Midwestern manners. It's very true. And I love hearing you talk about the different regions in the state, but also, the different regions of the world. And I hate the idea that we even have to come remotely close to ending this interview, because it's been absolutely delightful. And I just could listen to you talk about stories all day. And I know I'm not the only one. But one of the last questions is, what's next? You have all these stories, and you hinted at me that you're writing a lot during quarantine. Yes. Can you tease us at all for what you've got up and coming?
Yes, the next things that are coming out from my New York publishers will be this book here. This is the UK edition, but that's going to, I think, have the same cover in the United States. And that's a book, collected poems, and it's called In a Time of Distance. And so that's published sometime this year. I'm not quite sure exactly when it's coming out in the US. And then I've got volume 3 of my Scandinavian series, the Department of Sensitive Crime series. That's coming out, I think, in a few months' time, published in New York, and that's called The Man with the Silver Saab. So that's rather, and then I've got, what else have I got coming out? I've got a new novel in my Portuguese irregular verb series, the von Egelfeld series. That's a book called Your Inner Hedgehog. And that'll be appearing in a few months in the US. And then I will start very shortly to write volume 22 of my #1 Ladies Detective Agency.
22? Wow.
Yeah, the 22nd book. But before that, I'm writing, well, it's over there on my desk. I'm writing a book which starts off in Sri Lanka and ends up in Scotland. And I'm going to finish that in about 10 days' time.
So many books then, so many wonderful stories that we can continue just absorbing and sharing with one another. And, you know, Sandy's collection of poetry, In a Time of Distance, you can pre-order at tatteredcover.com, and you can make sure to get your copy of Pianos and Flowers as well. This has been such a delight. I don't know how to say thank you enough. I'm sure I'm not the only one feeling it, and the viewers, we're already getting people that are thanking you for taking the time to write, but also to come and join us here today. Just in case there's anybody who doesn't know, I want to give you a chance just to talk a little bit, remind people who you are, any last minute thoughts that you have before we close out tonight. This afternoon, I guess it's tonight for you.
Well, it is, yes, it's tonight for me. No, well, thank you so much, Michaeli, for that lovely talk. I really enjoyed talking to you, and we talked about a lot of things. We had a broad agenda. I send my warmest greetings to all my readers in Denver and in Colorado generally, and everywhere really, but in particular your neck of the woods. And I hope that before too long I will be able to return in person, and that we will meet in the flesh. But until then, I send you my warmest wishes.
And I want to just say thank you and reiterate that to everybody. We look forward to the day that when we can all safely gather and safely travel. For now, we're just so grateful that you're a part of our virtual community, and now Sandy is a part of that as well. Once again, you guys can buy Pianos and Flowers if you come into the store with your mask. At any of our locations. We have copies in all of our stores, but you can also buy it online at tatteredcover.com. And Sandy, if you'll stay on for a minute here before I close out. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Have a lovely rest of your weekend. Stay safe and happy reading. Bye, everyone.